And of course, staying in the news at this time, we'll go back to the South African story where, of course, the BBC has released a new documentary where it sort of highlighted the operations or some of the behind-the-scenes happenings of the operations of Dudula commanders. And of course, to shed more light on this, we are joined by Dr. Vusumuzi, Sibanda, to, of course, share more light on this particular development. Is the chairperson at the African Diaspora Forum, and he joins from Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time, Doctor.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, and afternoon to the listeners too.
All right, so let's get straight to it. What is your overview of the Operation Dudula BBC documentary and its focus on the hatred of foreigners?
Well, indeed, I mean, Dudula operation as a grouping, you will probably be aware that it has had to, break up a couple of times. I mean, Lux, for example, initially was one of the members of Dudula operation, but because of the highlights and the critiquing that has been taking place about its hatred of migrants, he ended up disassociating himself, with that particular organization, to the extent that now it remains, dwindling. It's Dudula operation, and you've got Put South Africa First, and you've got Patriotic Alliance by Gate and Mackenzie. So those are just, the groupings that seem to show that xenophobic flair, as far as the groupings are concerned. But Dudula is a very small, grouping now, much, concentrated in Alexandra, and of course some areas of Soweto. They've since, joined the Soweto Parliament and left the Dudula operation grouping.
Now, how concerned should we be about the potential for xenophobic attacks on foreigners in South Africa, considering the sentiments expressed by the Dudula movement?
Well, look, ideally, I think, we were concerned. I mean, when they started to show the ugly face and those marches, sometime last year. But what ultimately happened, when it got to the point when Lux was also arrested for raiding, a particular homestead in Diepkloof rather, where he ended up, just being, charged and found guilty, just in this month, it really, got to tone down a little bit. So there was a serious concern, when these marches were basically, right across the country, and then there was a lot of talk about it. But what we saw at that particular moment was much, much different than what we had seen in the past, especially in terms of the law enforcement, in the manner in which they had dealt with, these xenophobic attacks. You will remember that in the past, for example, in 2019, the response from the police had always been very, very slow when these attacks took place. But ideally, what then happened, last year when, they were so much on the campaign, the police were there completely, trying to ensure that they stop them from actually attacking, or there being clashes between them and the migrants. The only major incidents that we had were mainly those that were carried out by the All Truck Drivers Association, which is also a grouping that doesn't like migrants. And also some remote areas like in Polokwane, we actually had relatively more serious, issues there, but they were isolated incidents that the police, basically reacted to in time. And ultimately, what we saw happening is that the threat from Dudula operation has remained now just basically talk of, the right-wing extreme people like Donald Trump in America. But its impact really has dwindled at the moment.
All right, now let's talk about the efforts the South African government, has made to actually address the sentiment expressed by the group. And just a follow-up to that also, in your opinion, how is the representative of Dudula in South African attitude towards foreigners? Would you say they're a vocal minority, or do they hold some sort of significant influence at all?
Well, Dudula operation, like I said, indeed, it is a very small minority. But what we have also seen, and if you may remember, people like Gate and Mackenzie and people like, the Put South Africa First and Herman Mashaba's political, party, they were premised and mainly on xenophobic sentiments. And it appeared to be a very common, sentiment that was uniting a lot of political parties, and particularly the Democratic Alliance, because they've been talking a lot about illegal immigration and immigrants, in 2015, they got a good chunk, of the municipal, elections. But that was the thought that ideally it was because of, their hatred of migrants. But it can only show that it was actually the ANC losing support because of poor service delivery more than, the hatred of migrants. So you will notice that in the main, even those parties like the Democratic Alliance that had strong sentiments and that was complaining about porous borders, in the past, they have changed their rhetoric. They've got a more understandable and a more reasonable approach towards migration and the documentation of people. And you actually have got people in the ANC, like the Minister of Home Affairs, that are very xenophobic and tend to be are the ones that are aligned with these groupings like Dudula. But other than that, it's not really much. And that traction of the right-wing extremism, it has really died down, in a very huge way. It remains mainly a concept as far as the Minister of Home Affairs is concerned, because he's the main culprit who is fanning that fire and who shows that he has no tolerance for migrants and thinks, if you look at the Immigration Act and if you look at the visas that are being applied for in South Africa at the moment, you might actually realize that visas have taken up to 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, and there's been no processing, nothing has been coming out. So it is, the minister who is in that minority that surely shows that significant hatred towards migrants.
Dr. Sibanda, Chairperson at African Diaspora Forum, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Good afternoon.